Hey guys, this is Dave with Audio, and I have here the FOSI Audio DS2 portable USB DAC. And you all know how much I love devices that offer good value, like the Moondrop Dawn Pro, the Tangem Space Lite, a full Snowy Night, all of which I feel offer great features and performance for around or under $100. Now, FOSI Audio has introduced the very budget-friendly DS2, and I have to say, its performance is really good for the price, and after doing lots of testing and comparing, it might just be my new value king. We have a lot to talk about, so let's get started. Now, as far as what you get in the box, of course, you get the DS2 itself. It also includes a short Type-C to Type-C USB cable, and then a Type-C to Type-A adapter. It's priced at a very affordable $59, which is kind of crazy because this thing puts out an impressive 510 milliwatts at 32 ohms out of the 4.4 balanced output, but the 3.5 output has quite a bit less power and is a little more in line with what you typically see with a dongle style DAC in this price range, giving you about 130 milliwatts of output at 32 ohms. It uses dual CS43131 DAC chips, which is a commonly used chip. It's actually the same chip used in the Dawn Pro, Space Lite, K13, and many others. So that's on the inside. On the outside, we've already covered the 3.5 and 4.4 outputs. It also has physical volume buttons that function strictly as a volume control, so it does not change the gain levels or change filters. So in that sense, this doesn't really offer much in terms of additional sound features. We then have a Type-C input and a light indicator on the top that changes colors based on the sampling rate. Now, this does not have an internal battery, so it does draw power from the source device. It does, however, seem to be fairly efficient because I didn't really seem to notice any excess battery drain. It does drain the battery a little bit, but it seems to be about average, and it's comparable to most of the other devices out there. As far as the build and design, the design is simple, but I do like it. The housing is made of aluminum alloy, so it feels robust, but it's still quite light. Overall, while it doesn't offer much in terms of features, I do like the physical volume buttons, and it does offer pretty impressive amounts of power out of the 4.4 output. Okay, let's move on to the sound. Let's go ahead and talk about drivability and power output first, because that's kind of one of the things that jumped out at me. And if you're familiar with this channel and my reviews, you'll know that I've had a lot of portable USB DACs come across my desk over the last few years. And the reality is that even though dongle style DACs can perform at pretty high levels with inner monitors, they're still usually somewhat limited when it comes to power output and pushing full-size headphones, especially when compared to more powerful desktop devices, or even something like my M15S, which can put out about 1.2 watts in desktop mode. And even though you do come across some portable USB DACs with higher power output levels, like this one or the FIO K17, it seems like they're still falling a little bit behind in terms of overall sound performance, again, when trying to push some harder to drive full-size headphones like my Aria Stealths. And in the case of the DS2, I was able to reach good volume levels with basically all of my full-size headphones, but I did notice it's struggling a little to provide decent levels of bass dynamics, which is very common at this price point, especially, again, with non-battery powered portable USB DAC amps. It did, however, sound much, much better with IEMs. So let's talk about that. So the DS2's overall presentation is mostly linear, but it does lean slightly more clinical, and it reminds me a little bit of the Muse M3 Mark II, quite a bit actually. Now, the M3 Mark II does have a little better performance overall, but it does have that thinner and lighter presentation. And that's definitely, again, that's the case with the DS2 as well. As a matter of fact, when I was doing my side-by-side comparisons with all of the other dongles under $100, the DS2 seemed to have just a little less weight to its presentation, and it didn't quite have the authority in its base presentation that a lot of the others did have. And there were probably close to 20 other DACs I did comparisons with, so it's not really that common to come across a DAC that sounds lean like this. There were a couple, but for the most part, all of the other DACs had a little more body, and again, they just leaned a little closer to what I feel is a true linear. The exceptions being the Muse M3 Mark II, Muse M4, and the CDA M2, and this one. So the bass presentation is going to be a little thin sounding, and that does carry through into the lower mids and mid-range as well. And the way that impacts instruments and vocals is they just don't quite have that fullness or richness you might get with some of the competition. Now, as far as its treble presentation, it is really good. It does have adequate detail, cymbals sound natural, and I didn't really feel like I was missing anything. Now, I will say that because of the DS2's slightly thinner bass presentation, my attention does seem to be drawn a little more towards the treble. Now, of course, ideally, an amp shouldn't really add or take away from your source sound. And while there are some devices within this price range that are closer to linear, like the Snowy Night, K5, this is still close enough. And again, we're only talking $60, so you do have to kind of temper your expectations accordingly. So in terms of its overall sound presentation, I would say FOSI did a pretty good job keeping it close enough to linear for the most part. Now, in regards to its resolution, I do think its detail rendering is pretty good. I'd say it's about on par with most of the other dongles under $100. But the reality is it's not really necessarily going to outperform the competition in terms of its overall sound performance, but it is still very competent. And here's the thing, it still does a decent job of keeping things natural enough, which is very important. So when I was listening to one of my all-time favorite recordings, Jazz at the Pawn Shop, again, great for testing instrument naturalness, the saxophone has this nice full-bodied sound. And while the DS2 doesn't necessarily give me all of that full-bodied sound, it does give me enough to keep it from sounding overly thinned or completely unnatural. Now, of course, I also test for background noise, and I use my 2020 Andromedas since they are extremely sensitive and will detect even the smallest amounts of noise. And the background of the DS2 is basically black. It's very quiet. There was no background noise that I heard. So that's really good. So All that said, I do think this is a good value. However, I still prefer these other DACs over the DS2, especially the Snowy Night, Dawn Pro, because those are both going to give me a little more of that body and sound just a little more natural. So I like the DS2, but there are better options under $100 out there, in my opinion. And again, while the DS2 does have more power output than most of the competition, at least on paper, my experience was, while I was able to reach good volume levels with my full-size headphones, I didn't really seem to notice or experience any of the other potential benefits you might expect from that added power output, like increased bass dynamics, and that was using the 4.4 output, by the way. But just to summarize my thoughts on the DS2, unfortunately, it's not my new value king, but it is a pretty good value. Again, my biggest nitpick being that its presentation is a little too thin. On the other hand, it does a lot right. It's quiet. It does have good power output. It has decent detail levels. It sounds natural enough. It's power efficient, well built, and all of those attributes combined, I feel, easily does make it worth its $60 asking price. So that concludes my review of the FOSI Audio DS2. If you're new to the GizAudio channel and you like our videos, please take a minute and hit that subscribe button. And if you want to go a step further, you can also support us through our Patreon. I'll be sure and leave a link in the description. Thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch. Please like this video. Please share this video. I hope you have an awesome day.